Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And tonight I'm here to tell you about the mechanic. This is something that if you're already an old school gamer, you'll probably know this. I'm guessing you may or may not agree with me, but odds are you will if you're really an old school gamer. And what I'm here to tell you about is the mechanic that I think that old school D&D has that is most notoriously missing and whose absence is the most negative on new school D&D. It's actually been missing since like 3rd edition, but it's certainly missing from 5th, and I think it changes the whole game not to have it. Some of you who are old school gamers are probably guessing what I'm going to say. Or maybe not. There's a lot of stuff in old school gaming that is completely optional. For example, you know, the armor class going in reverse or things like that, or the type of saving throws that they do. But this was a mechanic that I think was pretty crucial to the experience of D&D, and particularly D&D combat. And that's why in my OSR games, in Lion and Dragon and Arrows of Indra, in both of those rules, I made sure to have it, and it's a very important part of the game. And these are morale rules. Before I continue, let me thank everyone who's already subscribed. We've had quite a few new subscribers the last little while, and I urge you, if you haven't already, to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And be sure to share this video anywhere you think it'll be interesting to people to hear, and that people could be interested in checking it out. And if you want to support me, well, I've got a Patreon page and a PayPal button in the link below. But really, the best way you can probably support me is by purchasing my products, either my full-blown games like the ones you see here, or my weekly PDF supplement series, RPG Pundit Presents, which is a PDF that costs anywhere between 99 cents to $4.99, depending on the issue. We've got like 86 issues out now, and so you're going to find something there that's going to be useful for you and for your games, and at the same time you're giving me a kind of a tip, so be sure to check it out. So, morale rules. What are they? In case you're a complete newbie and you've just come across this, this channel, morale rules are something that you don't see in 5th edition D&D. The way that they worked in old school D&D is that every creature that you faced had some kind of a morale rating. In the most classic version of the morale rules, the ones that I tend to like, that rating was between 2 and 12. And so you would roll on 2d6, where if you got equal to or less than the morale rating, that means that the creature succeeded in their morale check. If you got above their morale rating, they failed in their morale check. And the average morale might be like a 7, but of course tougher creatures had higher morale, and some creatures that were completely immune to fear or panic, for example unintelligent undead, would have a morale rating of 12, which meant that effectively they would never be frightened off. Now this was used primarily in combat, and it very much changes the game, because what happened after they took out the morale rules was that you would only have creatures flee from combat either never, which is what tended to happen most often, is that, you know, an encounter with a dozen orcs ended when either your party or those orcs were dead, right? Or in some cases, it might be that a scenario would say, oh, after such and such number of orcs are dead, they'll run away, which is like a fixed quantity, right? Or, you know, that they would run away at the DM's discretion, which leaves it, again, in a way, a fixed quantity, because the DM has to decide in his head when they're going to run away. And the thing about what makes morale rules so great, what makes them really work, is that neither the DM nor the players know necessarily when a combat's going to end. But it also means that a party can beat an enemy without fighting to the last breath, right? That an opponent could flee or possibly surrender without necessarily taking all of them on. So that you could have an encounter with a large number of creatures where the risk would be that they wouldn't fail their morale, and then you would have to keep fighting. But if they failed their morale, so it was always a gamble, right? If they failed their morale, then the creatures would run away or would surrender before you had to kill all of them. And this meant that a DM could present a much larger range of numbers or strength of monsters against a smaller party. And this then created a situation of uncertainty where the party might be facing a foe that, if they had to fight all of them down to the last hit point, would be more than they could handle. But if they were lucky, then the morale rating would allow them to win over a significant force that might otherwise be too much of a challenge for the party at the level they were at. The way morale worked basically is that there was individual morale, there was group morale. So an individual monster would do a morale check the first time they were hit, and then I think usually when they were like at half hit points, and then again at a third, right? And so if they made all of their checks, they'd keep fighting, and possibly to the death. But if they failed the morale check at some point, they would try to flee. If they failed it enough, or if they failed in certain circumstances, they might just try to surrender instead of to flee. That's the sort of thing where in a lot of systems you have like the DM using a judgment call, right? In Lion and Dragon, the morale setup is such that if a monster fails by a certain margin, it'll determine whether they try to do an orderly retreat or whether they panic and run for it, right? And whether if they fail by a certain margin where they can't actually run away, then they'll surrender. But if they fail by a lower margin than that and they can't run away, they'll keep fighting instead of surrendering. And this will also be affected depending on whether they believe that the party will spare them or not if they do surrender. So you can see how this is a mechanic that can radically alter your game, in my opinion, in a positive way. Because it means that you can have this sort of scenario of a group of adventurers that might try to do a rushing attack against a larger number of foes or a more powerful foe, and bet on them failing a morale check. Now, that doesn't always work, though, right? So it creates this uncertainty that reflects the uncertainty of real combat in a way that doesn't really happen if you're running the game in such a way that monsters never really run away. Or that if they do, it's arbitrary to the DM, because then the DM already has an idea of when he wants this to happen, and that makes it more artificial in a way. So if the players know that even the DM isn't sure when exactly the monster is going to flee, that means that they're not trying to do a kind of a Mother May I situation where they're kind of hoping to convince the DM, or they're hoping that the DM will be kind enough to have the monsters flee or surrender at the moment where they need them to. And that's an important distinction, right? So I think that that's one of the big things that was missing. When I was consulting on 5th edition, I really tried to convince them to include morale rules, but didn't work out. I'm not sure why the current designers of D&D think that morale rules are something that DMs wouldn't want now, because to me, they've always been brilliant. They've been a huge part of what makes the dynamic of D&D combat work really well. So I don't get why there's a certain crowd of game designers that either don't like morale or think that it's somehow not going to be popular for a group, because it's really a fantastic mechanic. And if I had to name one mechanic from old school that you might want to bring into your new school game, that would be it. It's not hard to do, right? Give an average creature a morale rating of 7, and then you can enhance that morale rating if it's a tougher creature or bigger creature. You can enhance it situationally if, for example, the number of creatures that are fighting your party outnumber them by 2 to 1 or by 3 to 1 or something like that. So you just kind of have to fix what the rating is, and then make the morale checks as the monsters fail. It doesn't have to be 2d6. It could be like 1d20 or something like that. It could be if you want to, maintain that regularization of all mechanics on a d20 basis. 2d6 is good though, because it's a curve, right? And a single d20 roll isn't a curve, so it makes it seem more unpredictable. With 2d6, if you have a 7 morale, you know that most of the time, by a slight margin, you're going to succeed in your morale check. But there's, and so the higher up the morale goes, the more extreme that creature is resistant to running away. and that can be a big advantage. So this is a short little video, but I just thought that it was worth sharing. I know that a lot of you in the crowd that watch my channel are already very familiar with old school rules, and for you this is not going to be anything new. But you may want to share this with some of the newbies in your group, especially if you're trying to convince some new school players to get what makes old school D&D combat cool, or if you want to try to convince your players to integrate morale into the 5th edition rules or whatever rules you happen to be using. So I guess that's it for today. Shorter video than usual, but they don't all have to go for 20 minutes, right? So if you like the video, again, please share it. Share it everywhere. That's the biggest way you can help me. Subscribe, of course. Thank you again to everyone who's subscribed. And thank you to everyone who's been purchasing the RPG Pundit Presents products, or who's been supporting me in other ways. You know, every video I tell people, you know, don't subscribe to Patreon, buy my products. But there's always some people that subscribe to Patreon. So that's nice too, I guess. And I really thank everyone for it. The latest RPG Pundit Presents issue is called High-Powered Assholes of the Last Sun, and it's a collection of high-level PC heroes of my famous Last Sun DCC Gonzo campaign, which you can kind of integrate as really weird Gonzo NPCs if you want to add some total bastards to your weird fantasy world. But if you don't like that idea, check out all the other recent ones. The last one before that was completely different. It was Kingston on Hull, which is a medieval city done up in a fantasy style, but using real medieval sources, real information. You get details about what it was really like, what life is like in that city, what the rules are, what the law is, what the different power factions are, and how everything works, plus local legends based on actual local legends, all that sort of thing. And if neither of those appeal to you, trust me, you're going to find something in 86 issues that you're going to like to add to your gaming world or to your gaming setup. So be sure to check them out, and be sure to check out our our later issues when they come out. Thanks again. Currently smoking Crown Cuddy plus Crowley's Best.